Hey guys, how's it going? So, I thought I would make this list pretty much just a tier list of if you're newer to RTA, what characters I would recommend that you build first, essentially. So what characters you should prioritize most of your gear on, because when you're newer to RTA or newer to the game in general, it makes it hard to decide like, okay, where should I be putting my molas, where should I be putting my gear, what characters do I actually need for RTA, what do I want to have built? You kind of want like a few tanks, a bunch of DPS, a bunch of supports, that kind of thing set up, right? So I thought I'd make this list for that. So you might disagree with a few of the things, but I'll try to explain to the best of my ability why the characters are in those positions and kind of how I went about this tier list. Now, keep in mind, some characters are really hard to build, like really hard to utilize or build, and some of them are hard to play as well. So I kind of put those characters a little bit lower down if I thought that they were just either insanely hard to build and that you can't utilize them easily, or if they combo with stuff and so it's kind of difficult, or, you know, just lower priority and not as good. So the different tiers I did are build first, high priority, solid situational characters, niche characters, lowest priority, and then no. Like, I don't recommend you build them. At least not until you've built most of the other stuff and really set up your teams. So let's start at the highest tier here. So build first. I would say these are all characters that you essentially absolutely want to have built and are useful for pretty much everybody. I think it's a good spread of characters that are supports, DPS, just in general useful units that pretty much everyone in the game not only wants to own, but also just insanely powerful. So let's quickly go through some of them. So I moved kind of the harder to build characters at the front here. So I have Conquerorless and Lua. I would say they're kind of the hardest to build out of all the characters here because they require speed gear. And you might say, I don't have speed gear, can I even use them? Yes, you can. A lot of people won't even contest them, and even if they do, usually they're just still really powerful, useful characters either way. Great openers. Quirk's the best cleanser in the game. Spectre Tenebra, one of the best DPS. Erewol's the best tank in the game. Aiden's an amazing DPS, so is Apocalypse Ravi. And also Erewol and Aiden are both free, along with Spectre Tenebra, and with the new Moonlight Blessing, Mediator Quirk or Conquerorless is also free, which is kind of awesome. Last Rider Crow is, I would say, either best or second best tank to Erewol. Angel of Light, amazing ML4. Karina, you might not have her, but she's one of the best anti-aggro kind of characters in the game. Angel of Light's going to get banned a lot, everyone hates her. Zio, just easy opener. Even if you have slow gear, you can always get the first turn with him, and he's useful for cleave, etc, right? Just amazing character. Destina, you can actually start the game with her. She's just a really solid cleanser. Cleansers are valued so much in the game right now, so I highly recommend them. High priority. So these are units that I think are really strong and really worthwhile to have built, but also I did kind of have to tune it a little bit based on how you could build them. So some characters that I would actually say would maybe be in high priority normally, I had to actually move down because when you're entering RTA, you can't spread your gear too thin, right? So some of these characters that I would have put there that I had to move down would have required the same, if not better gear than some of the characters in build first or high priority, and I feel like you can't really afford to do that. And I'll talk about them as I get to them. So high priority, Navy Captain Landy, pretty damn hard to build. Really hard to build character, easily one of the best characters in the game right now, insanely powerful. Rand Peyra, sort of similar, these two require really good speed gear, but they also help bridge the gap because they have such high speed that even if you're slower than your opponent, you can still take the first turn, which is really great. And they're also useful possibly against the other speed characters. Lone Crescent Bologna, just really solid DPS, but I also think she's not easy to build, but she's one of the premier characters to deal with Navy Captain Landy, so she can help you out a ton. Lionheart Surmia really came into the meta, especially since her buff, and also with Emma Landy, just great versus counterattacks, great versus dual attacks like Conquerorless and all that kind of stuff, really huge deal. Yolha, I would kind of consider to be maybe the 3rd to 4th best tank or so. I think she's just a really solid tank to have built and good at killing other characters. Shu, just a really solid DPS to have built into anything that's not green, I would say, or evasion, or stealth, which you could say is a lot, but still really good. Zahhak, the reason he's here is I think he is the easiest to build fast DPS character in the game, because he only requires 50% crit chance. That's why I put him higher up, and he deals with Aiden and other stuff. Edward, amazing versus debuffs. Briar Saria, ideally you have Guiding Light, but just amazing at dealing with so many teams. Big debuffs, deals with evasion, sets up so many teams. She's a DPS herself, just useful in so many situations. Belian, amazing versus Spectre Tenebra and versus a lot of cleave teams. So just really solid characters that I really think are worthwhile to build, but these top characters at the very top here I think are just the best, pretty much. You absolutely need to have built for a lot of RTA. Like, you might have a few of these that you don't have built or don't own, and you can fill them with some of these characters, but these are just the priority, right? Solid situational. So some of the characters here I think are actually insanely powerful, insanely useful. I recommend to have built, but some of them are kind of hard for you to use when you're entering RTA, so I'll talk about that. So Architect Leica, Strays. These characters are definitely hard to build if you're newer, especially Architect Leica. I would actually put Architect Leica into high priority, maybe even build first, but the thing is, she requires really good gear, and also she's generally used when you are first turn. When you have not only access to the first turn, like you have Emily and your opponent's not contesting, or also when you're first pick. So it makes her a lot more situational than some of these other characters. Strays is kind of similar, but he's easier to use and build than Leica. Last piece, Karin, is essentially a better Zahhak, I would consider, in a lot of situations, but she's much harder to build, so I'd put her lower down. Faithless Litica is not super easy to build, but you don't need crazy speeds because she can use Guiding Light, and she's a really useful character. Ahmed definitely requires some pretty good gear, especially a lot of speed, F-res kind of stuff, but she's just an insanely powerful character. Solitari requires some speed as well, and some effectiveness and tankiness, but really strong. Politis is a good anti-cleave, anti-aggro into certain units, especially some of the characters like Ahmed or Conqueror Lace, etc., but you don't see her as much. Sharoon, I think she's a really great character to have built, but debuffs are so powerful right now that by picking her, you can't pick another cleanser, which can sometimes be a bit detrimental, so I moved her a little bit lower at the moment, because I think cleansers are so important. Remnant Violet, he's a great character to have built, but usually you need the first turn advantage, so someone like Emilius, Lua, or just your opponent needs to not have a counter to him, but a lot of the counters to him are characters that are susceptible to first turn characters, so he's harder to use. Ocean Breeze Lilica is great to have built versus some of these openers. Leafy is really nice to have built, really solid character, counters to stuff like Lionheart, Land, etc. I put Greenlandy here. Now, you don't see her as much, and generally people build her full damage, but I think when you're entering RTA, she is especially still a very solid, useful unit to have built, and I think it's always worthwhile to have a Landy built, but she's not used as much. Amelia is just a pretty solid cleanser, I would say, overall right now, especially with the ReZero collab recent. Senya's a great anti-cleave, anti-aggro, good against Landy and stuff. Designer Lilibet is some good anti-aggro, anti-cleave cleanser. Ambitious Tywin can be a really great tank to have built. You don't see him as much because Last Strider Crowd, but he's still a really solid character. Rowan is great versus Navy Captain Landy and also just really solid in PvE, so you might have her already built, but just overall nice character to have versus specific counters like, maybe Belian or ML Landy. Pirate Captain Flan, debuffs are so powerful right now. If your opponent doesn't have someone like Mediator Quirk, she can really run away with the game. But you kind of need her artifact, right? Niche. Now, these are characters that I would say, some of them are really good characters. Some of them aren't. But they're more characters that have a really useful use, but you're not going to really be using them as much as some of these characters even. So Desert Joel Basar, I would say he fits specific playstyles usually. He is a solid, good unit, but you have to really know what you're doing with him, and you kind of have to fit a playstyle where he actually can be utilized. Otherwise, you might pick him and feel like he's not really doing that much. Tempest Surin, also he's not easy to build. Tempest Surin, I would say, is not easy to build, and she's pretty nice DPS right now, able to survive the debuffs and aggression, but she definitely requires some really good gear, and you can't pick her all the time into a lot of these teams. Milim requires definitely really good gear, but I think she's just a solid DPS. You won't see her as much right now. Same with Shuna. I think she's a really solid character, but you just don't see her as often anymore. Ross, you may already have him built for PvE and other stuff like that. And he's like a decent tank to have, but he's not really one of the priority characters compared to the other ones. Sylvan Sage Vivian, she's on the selector as well. I think she's a nice character, but she's kind of hard to use right now. Rimuru, kind of similar situation. Same with Alencia. Alencia is great if you have injury gear versus some of these health scaling characters, but still kind of hard to use, I'd say. Little Queen Charlotte is kind of a similar boat, not easy to use. Sagebone Sazan, he's not easy to build or use for people, but he still works versus some cleave teams, but you usually have to go insanely high res. People are going over 300. However, if you're lower ranked, you're not going to need as much resistance, and he might be a lot more useful for you because people won't have their teams as coherent. So I would maybe move him up, but yeah, just keep that in mind. Well, Cecilia is still a good mitigation tank, but not seen nearly as much. Jacko is an amazing aggro cleave unit if you're playing really aggressively and you're using characters that activate her, like you know, debuffers that attack, and she can be an amazing unit to have built, but she's more specific, especially when you're getting into RTA and you're not feeling confident about your speed, though. You might not want to use much, possibly. Depends on you. Infinite Horizon Cage is here just because cleansing is so good. I really value cleansing, especially if you're playing a more standard gameplay, so that's why she's here. Otherwise, I may have actually moved her down, but cleanse is so good. Chrono Kwazu, he's good versus, you know, like Lionheart Surmia, Emma Landy, those kinds of things. He's just a solid character, and you might already have him built for Guild War. Sid, he helps bridge the gap with your speed, where you get a nice speed imprint, and he might help you get the first turn if you're playing really aggressively. And Crimson Armin is just a solid knight to have as well. Now the characters in lowest priority, some of these are characters I actually really like, but I don't think that they're a high priority unit for somebody who's starting RTA to really have built and be using. Some of them are kind of meh, some of them are pretty great characters in my opinion, but just in general, let me just briefly go over them, but just in general, I don't recommend somebody who's entering RTA to have them built. Like for instance, Arya is a good character, but like she requires such insane gear and she's not easy to use, especially if you don't exactly have a good team comp around her, so I don't recommend her as much. But for a lot of these others, like I use Roy a bunch, but I don't recommend you go into RTA with him and use a bunch of your top gear on him compared to these other characters, and he's not as easy to use. But just overall, a lot of these characters, a few key ones I would say is like she's specific for cleave. Celine is kind of a trap character where a lot of people think she's great, but then she'll be kind of awkward. Dark Corvus, like sure, he's really doing decently versus Emma Landy and stuff, but I just wouldn't recommend prioritizing his gear, right? Same with a character like Lilius as a Lua counter, don't recommend it. Fairy Tale Tenebria is really nice, but I don't recommend that you immediately build her or anything like that, but she's good versus some of these Angel of Light teams. Maid Chloe is a great character for the Maid Chloe teams, but if you're not doing that specific team, I don't really recommend her. Commander Pavel, just because he's on the selector, I mean, he's okay for cleave, but not used as much anymore. Same with ML Ray, just not really used as much as he was before. Both of them could come back to the meta depending on what happens. Same with Ida. Requiem Rowana is actually a very strong character in specific team comps at the moment, but I have her really low down because a lot of people don't understand how to use her or what they should be doing, or maybe don't have the gear to really utilize her. Definitely more of a whale character, just because you usually need fast characters to use with her to really bring out her strengths. That's why she's low down, even though I'd say she's pretty good right now at the moment. And then a couple of speed imprints right there with Watch Sherry Silk, and that's kind of about it. Just because you might have Angelic Montmorency build, if you have no other cleansers, I guess you could use her a little bit. And then the characters in No. Some of these characters you might like. You might be like, oh, I like this character, I think they're pretty decent. But to be honest, I don't find these characters good in RTA. I don't recommend people build them until they've built the majority of other things that they have set up. Once you have all your RTA set up and you're feeling good about yourself, then you could maybe start messing around with some of these, but I really don't recommend it. And you might ask about some of the characters maybe that are on the right side. Some of them haven't even come out, like Brig and Urban Shadow Shu, but I just don't even think these characters are worthwhile building for the most part, is what I would say. I mean, you could maybe put like Moon Bunny, but I would put her down in No, to be honest. But all in all, I think that's kind of my tier list. So just to reiterate, the characters in build first, I would say the ones that you kind of want to put some of your best gear. You really want to prioritize these characters. Hopefully you have them. Some of them are free, which is great. You can get a surprising amount of these for free right now. A lot of them are MLs though. Keep in mind, if you're missing some, don't feel bad. You'll eventually get them and you can fill the holes in your draft with other stuff. It's just, if you have them, I really recommend putting your best stuff. Then high priority, these are also great units to have built, or nice backups to some of the other ones, but just overall really powerful characters. Solid situational. It doesn't mean that they're like that much worse than high priority. It's just, I think you don't want to put as good gear on them as you would put the other characters. And also just, they might be really hard to build, such as, Architect Leica Strays, Last Piece Karin, etc., right? Niche, they might require more game knowledge or specific teams, or specific types of gear that you might not have, which is why they're in this category. Lowest priority, they might be like pretty decent characters, but they're either really hard to build or really hard to use, or just not as priority as any of these other ones, right? They are not the best in their class or fulfill their roles the best. And then No is No, right? I think that's pretty straightforward. But anyways, I hope this helped you. I tried to lay it out as simply as I can, but I know RTA is really stressful, and a lot of people are just like, holy, like, who am I supposed to put my gear on? What do I actually want built? and I hope that this helps you. So if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like or subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you next time.